Hey guys, tonight we step off a creaking wooden platform and into the late 19th century American West, where the air feels dry enough to erase your thoughts and the sun sits overhead like it's personally offended by you. You're standing there in present tense, boots already dusty, realizing your phone has no signal, no battery, and no concept of what a charging cable even is. The town ahead of you looks calm. But calm here is a temporary condition, like silence in a room full of toddlers. This is the part where I gently warn you that you probably wouldn't survive this, not dramatically, just gradually. Mostly due to dehydration, bad decisions, and a complete lack of snacks. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, go ahead and comment where you're listening from and what your local time is, because somewhere out there it's 3 a.m. And you're bravely choosing sleep history over actual sleep. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You take a slow walk down the main street and the first thing you notice is the sound. Boots on dirt, a distant hammer, a cough that sounds like it's been working since 1872. The widely accepted historical fact here is that most Wild West towns weren't chaotic war zones. They were small, practical places built around trade, transport, or resources like cattle or silver. Still, they smell exactly like what happens when people, animals, and heat agree to coexist without plumbing. Your nose wrinkles. That's normal. Everyone's does. A lesser-known detail is that many towns scattered lime or ashes in the streets to control mud and odor, which helped a little, but mostly just added a faint campfire plus regret aroma. You pretend not to notice because pretending is a core survival skill here. Buildings lean slightly like they're tired already, wood fades fast under this sun, and paint gives up early. You pass a saloon with swinging doors that squeak dramatically, even though no one asked them to. Somewhere inside, a piano is being played with deep emotional commitment and questionable skill. One light joke for your brain. This is the original open-plan office, except louder and with more spitting. You realize how exposed everything feels. No air conditioning, no sunscreen. Hats are not fashion statements. They're medical equipment. Historians still wonder whether newcomers were more shocked by the climate or by how quickly their expectations collapsed once they arrived. You pause, listening to the wind carry dust across the street, and it dawns on you that nothing here is rushing to help you. Life moves at the speed of heat and habit. The town doesn't notice you yet, and that might be the most dangerous part. You take another step forward and the dust welcomes you, like it knows you'll be staying a while. The sun climbs higher, and suddenly breakfast becomes your first real confrontation with the Wild West. You squint at a small wooden table outside the saloon, where the coffee is dark, thick, and suspiciously murky, likely filtered through the same water that almost certainly comes from a nearby creek. It's a widely accepted historical fact that early Western coffee was mostly boiled water with grounds, strong enough to dissolve your patience if you let it sit too long. You take a tentative sip and wonder if anyone has survived this more than once, without a sugar cube or a pinch of hope. Food itself is another story. Bacon is fried until it's crispy on the edges and chewy in the middle, just like your expectations of civilization. Eggs are pale and slightly chalky because fresh eggs aren't guaranteed here, and bread, well, if you can call it that, is dense enough to double as a doorstop. A lesser-known quirk is that settlers often added ashes to bread dough as a preservative, which gives you a crunchy hint of welcome to survival. You nibble cautiously, realizing your Instagram aesthetic would not survive this. You glance around the table at the locals, who treat this breakfast like it's a ritual and not a test of human endurance. You notice a cowboy stirring his coffee with a knife, which seems like an efficient, if slightly alarming, solution to a missing spoon. Historians still debate how often meals actually included meat versus just flour, beans, and whatever root vegetables could be foraged. So your bacon may be a special occasion. As you chew thoughtfully, you notice the smells. Smoke from frying fat curls lazily into the morning air, mixing with the scent of hay, horse manure, and dust. Like a perfume no one in the modern world would ever bottle. A light joke comes to mind. If someone told you this would be your breakfast view, you'd probably ask for oatmeal back in your cozy kitchen. But here you are, tasting history, one crunchy, ash-flavored bite at a time. The sun continues to climb, warming your shoulders, and suddenly you realize there's no fridge, no shelf-stable yogurt, and no snack drawer waiting in a cabinet. Every meal has urgency. Every bite is a commitment. Watered-down milk might be a gamble, cheese may be a science experiment, and any fruit is seasonal and adventurous. Survival depends on eating when you can, not when you want to. You notice the townspeople casually discussing livestock prices, stagecoach schedules, and the weather, as if these aren't life-or-death details. You, however, feel a creeping awareness. Breakfast is the first gentle reminder that the Wild West doesn't care if you have modern expectations. You swallow a mouthful of gritty bread, and a whisper of humor sneaks in. At least, you don't have to make your own fire today yet. By the time your meal is over, you've realized two things. One, you've eaten something that probably violates multiple contemporary health codes. And two, your stomach now understands that civilization is just a temporary illusion here. Your body braces for the next encounter. Water, because without it, breakfast is just a prelude to disaster. You leave the saloon with the dusty taste of breakfast still lingering in your mouth and immediately face your first real Wild West problem. Water. Not just any water, but clean, safe, drinkable water. The town well sits in the center, its wooden frame sun-bleached and unassuming, yet it holds a centuries-old secret. Everyone here treats it like gold, and for good reason. It's a widely accepted historical fact that contaminated water was a major cause of illness in frontier towns, and settlers often boiled or filtered it whenever possible, if they remembered to. You grip the bucket handle, realizing that what modern life gave you automatically, hydration without effort, now feels like an earned privilege. You peer into the well, wondering how many people before you have leaned over this edge and silently hoped they wouldn't come back with cholera. The water looks deceptively clear, but a lesser-known detail reminds you that clarity doesn't equal safety. Settlers sometimes added alum or skimmed-off scum to make water presentable, a practice that may have helped appearances more than actual health. You wonder, with the tiniest tremor in your mind, how often locals really got sick versus just blame the next wagon train. Historians still wonder if some townspeople were immune to certain diseases simply because they had no choice but constant exposure. Filling your tin cup, you lift it to your lips and grimace slightly at the mineral-heavy taste, a mix of iron, dust, and faintly earthy undertones. A small joke crosses your mind. If this were a coffee, it would be called rust brew, and somehow it feels about right for the morning. You sip slowly, savoring the way hydration can feel revolutionary when it doesn't come from a faucet. Nearby, a horse nudges the edge of the well, curious or impatient, or perhaps plotting. Horses are one thing, but water is another, and you understand quickly that the simpler the resource, the more fiercely it's defended. You realize that even though the town seems quiet, survival revolves around these basic necessities, not gunfights or dramatic standoffs. As you set your cup down, you notice the subtle rhythm of daily life. The bucket being lowered and raised, boots scraping in the dirt, and the occasional cough from someone who didn't boil their water last week. The sun warms your back and the wind carries fine particles of dust from the surrounding plains. A light joke flits into your thoughts. Congratulations, you now understand why water is called liquid gold in every history book that matters. Walking away from the well, you feel a quiet tension. Clean water is no longer an assumption, it's a decision. And that decision, you now realize, touches every other part of life here: food, hygiene, even the way townsfolk interact. The next step will test your endurance even further, because now you have to rely on a creature far less cooperative than the well: the horse. You find yourself standing beside a horse, A creature that looks deceptively calm, but radiates the kind of quiet judgment only animals with strong opinions can project. You might have imagined that horses are just large, friendly companions for your journeys, but here in the Wild West, they are both transportation and temperamental co-workers. The widely accepted historical fact is that horses were essential for moving goods, traveling long distances, and managing livestock. Without one, you are basically a pedestrian in a world built for hoofed locomotion. This horse snorts, swishing its tail, and you can almost hear it saying, "Really? You think you're in charge?" A lesser-known detail is that many settlers used tricks, treats, and even small threats to persuade horses into compliance. Bribery with oats was standard, but sometimes a gentle nudge wouldn't suffice, and historical records hint at more creative, even stubborn methods to motivate them. You can't help but chuckle quietly, imagining yourself attempting the same in your modern sneakers. You swing onto the saddle, feeling the awkward reality of weight distribution and balance, and instantly realize your imagination has lied to you about riding. Movies make it look elegant, almost carefree, but the truth is a subtle choreography of adjusting stirrups, heels, reins, and your own nervous energy. Historians still wonder how many first-time riders survive the first mile without topple, bruised pride, or both. You grip the reins tighter, tasting the faint tang of leather and horse, a reminder that survival here is tactile, immediate, and slightly terrifying. The horse steps forward, slow and deliberate. Dust kicks up around your boots and hooves, filling your nose with that signature frontier aroma, dry earth, hay, and just a hint of manure. You feel every small movement, every shift of weight, and discover that the balance between trust and control is delicate. A joke nudges the edge of your thoughts. Congratulations. You now understand why cowboy movies never show riders checking their boots for dust halfway through a long journey. As you adjust to the rhythm, you watch other horses move with grace, some dragging wagons, others standing tethered and patient. You start to appreciate their personalities. The lazy ones who seem permanently bored, the high-strung ones ready to bolt at a bird's shadow, and the cooperative few who actually make your morning commute possible. In the Wild West, your horse is both partner and test of patience, and you feel the weight of dependency quietly pressing into your spine. By the time you trot along a dirt path out of town, the sun is warming your shoulders, and the sound of hooves against packed earth becomes hypnotic. You notice the horizon stretching endlessly ahead, reminding you that in this world, mobility isn't a luxury, it's a necessity. And yet, even with a horse beneath you, life remains a negotiation between you, the animal, and a landscape that isn't inclined to wait. You can feel your pulse settle into a gentle rhythm, understanding that, for better or worse, this partnership is essential. The morning stretches lazily as you find yourself knee-deep in the reality of frontier labor. Life here is a constant negotiation between your energy, the land, and your expectations of comfort, which were already crushed somewhere between breakfast and mounting the horse. A widely accepted historical fact is that settlers, ranchers, and miners often worked from sunrise to sunset, their days measured by the sun rather than the clock. And suddenly, your modern sense of a short workday feels laughably luxurious. You are handed a task, perhaps stacking hay, hauling water, or inspecting a fence, and immediately notice how physically demanding it is. Every motion requires balance, attention, and just enough strength to remind you that muscles you took for granted are, in fact, optional back home. A lesser-known detail is that many frontier workers developed specific calluses and habits unique to their trade, like how a miner might sharpen his pick or a rancher could lasso without looking, almost as if their bodies were secretly smarter than their brains. You start wondering if your modern thumbs, trained for swiping screens, will survive a full day of gripping tools. Sweat beads on your forehead, mixing with dust and the faint aroma of hay. You realize that fatigue here is not dramatic. It's slow, creeping, and relentless, like gravity conspiring to remind you of your limitations. Historians still debate how settlers maintained morale despite this unending labor, whether routines, social gatherings, or sheer stubbornness kept them moving forward. You quietly conclude that stubbornness might be your only chance of survival. The sun beats down, warming your back as you lift, pull, and haul. Your movements are unpracticed but improving, though every so often a fence post wobbles suspiciously or a bucket spills, reminding you that even minor mistakes have immediate consequences. A light joke drifts through your mind. Congratulations, you are now officially part of a work crew where complaining is invisible, and efficiency is measured in dust particles displaced. You notice how intertwined life is here. Your efforts are directly tied to your survival and that of everyone around you. Miss one task, and someone goes thirsty, hungry, or both. There's no someone else will take care of it, and the idea of outsourcing your problems feels laughably modern. Even taking a brief pause to wipe sweat from your eyes, you're aware that this landscape demands attention, patience, and more than a little humility. By midday, your muscles ache in unfamiliar ways and your hands bear evidence of effort. Small blisters forming, faint cuts from wood, scratches from brush. Yet there is a rhythm in the labor, a cadence that starts to feel almost meditative. The wind picks up slightly, carrying the smell of livestock, earth, and distant smoke from another homestead. You realize, in a quiet and slightly painful revelation, that surviving the Wild West isn't about heroics. It's about persistence, endurance, and adapting to the relentless pace of a world that doesn't pause for you. The afternoon brings an unexpected encounter with frontier medicine, and you realize quickly that health care here is more of a suggestion than a service. You cut your finger on a piece of rough wood, and someone, likely a neighbor with confidence far exceeding competence, produces a tin of salve, a pair of scissors, and instructions that sound equal parts science and guesswork. A widely accepted historical fact is that 19th century towns often had minimal medical professionals, and many injuries or illnesses were treated at home using basic remedies. You take a deep breath, trying not to imagine the consequences of a sneeze or a misstep while this procedure is underway. The smell of alcohol hits your nose as your treatment begins. A lesser-known detail is that settlers frequently used whiskey as both antiseptic and painkiller, and sometimes the patient ended up more relaxed than the wound. You stare at the open tin, wondering if bravery counts as a form of medicine, because this is a world where survival sometimes requires ignoring the obvious risks. Historians still wonder if some remedies actually did more good than harm, or if confidence alone accounted for miraculous recoveries. You settle into the slow rhythm of observation. The person treating you hums a tune, their hands surprisingly steady, and you find yourself oddly comforted despite the oddity of it all. A joke drifts to the surface. Congratulations, you now know why cowboy bandages are not a thing in any modern pharmacy. You realize your modern medical assumptions, sterile, precise, predictable, don't apply here. Instead, life is messy, improvisational, and occasionally fragrant with antiseptic whiskey. As you sit there, the town hums around you. Children chase each other barefoot, dogs bark in the distance, and a horse somewhere near the stable tosses its head. The sun is slowly descending, giving the world a golden glow that doesn't exactly make up for the sharp sting of reality, but softens it. Just enough to feel like life is survivable. You notice how small gestures, like a neighbor's calm hands or a bit of water on a wound, become monumental acts of care in a place with few guarantees. By the time the makeshift treatment ends, you have a minor bruise, a scratched ego, and a newfound respect for frontier resilience. You sip water slowly, tasting the earthy tang and reflecting that this is a world where small victories matter. Your mind wanders. What would happen if you had to rely solely on these remedies for a serious illness? The question lingers, both unsettling and strangely grounding. You rise carefully, feeling lighter yet oddly heavier from the knowledge that your body is now officially part of this environment. The day moves forward and you understand that danger isn't always dramatic. It's quiet, cumulative, and wrapped in the hands of people who've learned to improvise. In this place, survival isn't heroic, it's practical, patient, and occasionally sarcastic in its own way. The sun dips lower, casting long shadows across the town, and you notice the sheriff's office tucked between a saloon and a general store. Law enforcement here is flexible. A widely accepted historical fact is that sheriffs, marshals, and constables often had limited resources and relied heavily on reputation, negotiation, and the occasional show of authority rather than strict policing. You watch as a lanky man leans on the door frame, hat tilted, eyes sharp but relaxed, exuding an aura that says, "I might intervene, or I might not depending on my mood and the bribe situation." A lesser-known detail is that many towns relied on informal justice. Disputes were often settled by consensus, intimidation, or a public display rather than official court proceedings. People who failed to respect local social rules quickly learned that reputation carried more weight than badges. You feel a tiny shiver as you realize that in this environment, charm, quick thinking, or even pure luck might be the difference between a quiet evening and an awkward confrontation. Historians still debate how effective frontier justice really was. Some say it maintained order. Others argue it was chaos masquerading as civility. As you wander past, a minor scuffle erupts between two locals arguing over a fence line. The sheriff steps forward, raises one finger, and the argument dissolves almost magically. You catch yourself wondering how much of this is theater. A light joke crosses your thoughts. Apparently, the Wild West version of conflict resolution involves dramatic pauses and very careful eyebrow raising. You nod to yourself. Modern conflict resolution courses have a lot to learn from subtle theatricality. You pause near the jail, noticing the small, cramped cells, imagining the patience required to survive a night within. The walls are sturdy but minimal, a reminder that this is a world of quick solutions rather than long-term incarceration. Outside, the air smells faintly of hay, dust, and fried food, comforting in an odd way like a memory of breakfast long digested. The town feels alive with quiet rules, invisible but felt. Everyone knows who holds authority, who can be trusted, and who is merely posturing. You realize that survival here isn't about heroics. It's about understanding the social landscape, reading expressions, and, occasionally, nodding in agreement to avoid unnecessary trouble. The sheriff watches you casually, and you feel simultaneously reassured and mildly evaluated. By the time the shadows stretch further, you sense the delicate balance between law and disorder. The street seems calmer now, but you know it could shift instantly. Life in the Wild West, you reflect, isn't chaotic in a loud sense. It's organized chaos, held together by subtle social contracts, reputation, and the occasional quick-thinking lawman. And for someone like you, simply observing and nodding might just be the most effective survival strategy of all. You hear the faint echo of boots on wood from the saloon, and your imagination immediately jumps to a dramatic gunfight. Pop culture has trained you to expect quick-draw showdowns, revolvers flashing, and heroic standoffs. But a widely accepted historical fact reminds you that actual shootouts were surprisingly rare. Most violence in the Wild West was quieter, slower, and far less cinematic. You step carefully down the street, noticing the subtle tension in the air, the kind that comes from disputes over land, debts, or livestock rather than dueling in the midday sun. A lesser-known detail is that many gunfights that did occur were brief, often over before anyone could draw a full breath, and frequently involved missed shots or accidental injuries. The reality is messy, unpredictable, and more about intimidation than spectacle. You feel your pulse quicken slightly, realizing that the romanticized drama you imagined has little to do with survival, which depends on timing, patience, and a keen sense of when to step aside. Historians still debate whether some legendary shootouts were exaggerated over time, creating myths that entertained far more than they reflected reality. As you continue down the main street, you notice the quiet violence that isn't in stories, heated arguments, small thefts, disputes over water rights, and the occasional scuffle that never makes it into a history book. A light joke crosses your mind. Apparently, chaos here comes in installments rather than full seasons, and you are stuck waiting for the next episode. You begin to appreciate how survival requires awareness, a calm demeanor, and a willingness to avoid unnecessary confrontation. A dog barks somewhere, a horse neighs, and the wind carries the faint tang of gunpowder from a distant target practice. You inhale deeply, noticing how ordinary life carries subtle hints of danger, as if the environment itself is testing your attentiveness. You realize that your nerves are part of the landscape now. The world doesn't adapt to you. You adapt to it. The more you walk, the more you see that preparation matters more than speed. People store water, check their weapons, and negotiate constantly. Every action has consequences, sometimes delayed, sometimes immediate, but always significant. By contrast, your imagined cinematic gunfight seems almost laughably inefficient, replaced by a slow, grinding, and persistent struggle for survival. By evening, shadows stretch long across wooden sidewalks. You pause at a fence reflecting on the subtle lessons of the day. Danger isn't always loud, heroism isn't always flashy, and the Wild West thrives on tension, strategy, and restraint. The quiet violence is a teacher, and if you pay attention, you learn quickly that noticing the small, unspectacular threats is far more important than fantasizing about legendary duels. And with that thought, your attention drifts to the sky, where the weather is preparing its own challenges. The sky begins to shift, and you notice the weather doesn't much care about your plans or your comfort. Sunlight lingers, hot and insistent. Then a sudden gust sweeps dust across the street, scratching at your skin like tiny reminders that the environment has its own rules. A widely accepted historical fact is that frontier towns were at the mercy of extreme weather. Heat waves, sudden storms, and freezing nights could arrive with little warning, testing both equipment and resolve. You shield your eyes, wondering how anyone thrived when conditions change so dramatically from hour to hour. A lesser-known detail is that many settlers learned to read the sky, the wind, and the behavior of animals to anticipate storms or sudden drops in temperature. Birds huddled unusually or cattle shifting restlessly were subtle signals, almost like an unspoken conversation with nature. You pause, listening to the whisper of wind through wooden planks, imagining yourself trying to interpret a message from a cloud that seems entirely uninterested in your survival. Historians still debate how much foresight and luck combined to keep settlers alive during extreme events. As clouds gather on the horizon, you feel the first hint of rain in the air. The smell is different here. Drier, heavier, earthy, and oddly comforting, reminding you that survival isn't always about avoiding danger. Sometimes it's about noticing and preparing for it. A small joke sneaks in. Congratulations. You now understand why weather apps would have been a mystical luxury. Your fingers tighten on the reins of your horse as you watch the sky, realizing that storms here aren't just inconvenient. They can dictate travel, work, and even who gets water or firewood. The wind picks up suddenly, flinging dust into your eyes and scattering loose papers or straw. You duck instinctively, your muscles remembering yesterday's labor as they brace for movement. The horse shifts uneasily beneath you, ears flicking back and forth, responding to stimuli you can barely detect. You notice how quickly attention and readiness become second nature, a silent dialogue between human, animal, and environment. The first drops of rain fall, warm against your sunburned skin, and you notice that even minor weather changes demand action. Tarps must be tied, fires sheltered, livestock moved. The rhythm of life here isn't dictated by convenience. It's dictated by the whims of a world that doesn't pause for thought. A final light joke flits through your mind. Congratulations! You now know why indoor plumbing feels like magic, because outside, even gravity has opinions. By late afternoon, the clouds shift again, leaving streaks of orange and gold across the sky. You breathe deeply, noticing the scent of wet earth, the sound of rustling leaves, and the subtle coolness that follows a storm. Weather here is a persistent teacher, and you begin to sense that survival requires constant attention, subtle adaptation, and a willingness to respect forces far larger than your own. And as the day leans toward evening, you feel both humbled and oddly connected to the rhythm of this unforgiving but mesmerizing world. The road stretches ahead, quiet except for the occasional creak of your horse and the whisper of wind over the plains. Traveling between towns, you begin to understand a new challenge: isolation. Long distances, sparse settlements, and empty horizons are more than scenery. They shape behavior, relationships, and the quiet of your own mind. A widely accepted historical fact is that frontier travel often meant days, sometimes weeks, of solitude, forcing people to rely on themselves and their animal companions. You notice the subtle tension in your shoulders, a reminder that vigilance is necessary even when nothing appears to threaten you. A lesser-known detail is that some travelers carried personal rituals, songs, or repeated phrases to stave off loneliness. Diaries from the period show settlers reciting prayers, counting landmarks, or even talking aloud to inanimate objects as a kind of mental survival tool. You hum a random tune to yourself, half embarrassed, realizing this might be more effective than you expected. Historians still debate how much prolonged solitude shaped personalities, whether it fostered resilience, paranoia, or an odd mix of both. The landscape around you feels both empty and alive. Distant hills ripple with heat, a solitary bird circles overhead, and the occasional tumbleweed crosses your path like a slow, rolling reminder of motion in an otherwise still world. You become hyper-aware of sounds: the crunch of gravel under hooves, the rustle of a brush, a distant murmur of a creek, small markers that measure time and presence. A light joke flits across your thoughts. Congratulations! You now understand why podcasts weren't invented yet. Silence is surprisingly loud. Even the companionship of your horse is amplified by the quiet. Its steady breathing and rhythmic steps are both reassuring and grounding, a reminder that communication extends beyond words. You feel the subtle weight of responsibility. Keep your horse fed, alert, and safe. Every decision matters because mistakes are magnified in isolation. Hours pass. Shadows stretch and shrink as the sun drifts across the sky. Your thoughts wander to people you might meet, towns you will reach, and the uncertain arrival of food, water, or shelter. The emptiness forces reflection. You notice details about yourself, your patience, and your ability to adapt. Each mile tests endurance quietly without the dramatic flair of cinematic standoffs. By late afternoon, the horizon glows gold. You pause, watching how isolation shapes perception. A distant shape becomes a mountain, a tree, or perhaps a person you hope is approaching. Life on the frontier teaches subtle attentiveness, humility, and respect for the unknown. And in that stillness you recognize a curious truth. Survival isn't just about skills or luck. It's about finding rhythm, patience, and quiet resilience in spaces where no one else is around to notice. The sun begins its slow descent, painting the sky in muted shades of orange and purple, and you realize the day isn't over, even if your modern idea of fun has long abandoned you. Entertainment here is surprisingly limited, yet deeply embedded in survival and social connection. A widely accepted historical fact is that frontier towns offered few distractions beyond music, storytelling, gambling, and the occasional local gathering. You glance at the saloon across the street, imagining evenings filled with piano tunes, laughter, and the shuffle of cards over worn wooden tables. A lesser-known detail is that many settlers improvised amusements with whatever they had. Tin cans became drums, decks of cards were borrowed endlessly, and storytelling was a skill honed over long, dark winters. You watch a group laughing over a small game, noticing how repetition doesn't dull their enjoyment. It strengthens community. Historians still wonder how much boredom and scarcity influence creativity, and you feel a quiet empathy for people who had to invent delight from dust and imagination. You wander closer to the saloon doors, hearing the familiar squeak and shuffle, and you consider joining. Music drifts out, slightly off-key but passionate, and the smell of fried food mingles with the dust from the street. You realize that entertainment here is never passive. It requires participation, attention, and an unspoken tolerance for imperfections. A light joke sneaks into your thoughts. This is where karaoke meets survival training, and everyone is required to excel equally poorly. Nearby, a small group discusses the latest gossip, bets on the next horse race, and recounts minor disputes from the morning. You notice how storytelling serves multiple purposes: amusement, education, and the quiet reinforcement of social rules. The cadence of tales, punctuated by laughter and groans, becomes hypnotic in its familiarity, almost like a lullaby for a community that knows its rhythms intimately. You decide to sit on a nearby fence, absorbing the scene. Dust settles slowly around you, mingling with the aroma of coffee, fried meat, and well-worn leather. The sun continues to dip, casting long shadows across wooden sidewalks and creating a stage for both mundane life and small dramas alike. Even as entertainment is simple, it shapes perception. A story told once may be retold countless times, carrying lessons, humor, and history along with it. By evening, you feel the gentle pull of fatigue, but also a sense of quiet connection. You've observed music, games, and conversations, the heartbeat of a town that thrives on modest joys. Life here is slower, deliberate, and communal, and you notice that these small rituals are as vital as food, water, or shelter. They teach patience, social awareness, and the subtle art of finding satisfaction in fleeting moments. Night approaches, and you notice how life on the frontier shifts depending on who you are. Women, families, and community roles are both defined and flexible, shaping daily survival in subtle ways. A widely accepted historical fact is that women in frontier towns managed households, cared for children, and often participated in farming, ranching, or small businesses, blurring modern assumptions about traditional gender roles. You watch a woman move through a small homestead, efficiently managing chores that would take multiple people in your own time, and realize your morning routine would barely suffice here. A lesser-known detail is that many women carried informal authority, running boarding houses, trading goods, or mediating disputes, creating influence outside official positions. You notice the quiet power in her gestures, the confident way she balances multiple tasks, and the awareness that her survival skills are as vital as anyone's in town. Historians still debate how independent women truly were on the frontier. Some narratives emphasize subservience, others reveal surprising autonomy. You feel a gentle appreciation for the resilience woven into daily routines, a quiet marvel at human adaptability. Children run barefoot across streets, unbothered by dust or minor injuries, their laughter punctuating the air. You notice that family roles often blend survival and play, discipline and ingenuity. A light joke drifts through your mind. Congratulations! Your childhood sandbox would have been considered serious infrastructure here. You observe a mother teaching her child to milk a goat, manage firewood, and keep track of supplies, all in a span of a few minutes. And you recognize that learning here is practical, immediate, and relentless. Dinner preparations begin, and you see how households organize themselves around shared labor. The balance between men, women, and children reflects necessity more than social theory. Everyone contributes where needed. You watch small interactions, passing tools, adjusting a pot over a fire, sharing knowledge with a whisper or a glance, and understand that cooperation is as essential as skill. By evening, the home feels alive with quiet energy, a contrast to the isolation of the road or the dust of labor. You sense a rhythm. Tasks are completed, meals shared, lessons taught, and responsibility silently acknowledged. The sun dips behind the hills, casting long shadows that stretch across the wooden floorboards. You notice the soft glow of lanterns, the smell of cooking, and the warmth of shared space, realizing that survival here isn't just about strength or skill. It's about connection, awareness, and adapting to roles that are as fluid as the seasons. As night settles, you reflect on how gender, family, and collaboration define the frontier experience, shaping both daily life and long-term resilience. Even in small acts, tending animals, preparing food, teaching a child, you sense the quiet hum of survival, woven into routines that are as necessary as breathing. You take a deep breath, noticing the combined scent of earth, smoke, and human activity, and understand that the frontier isn't just a place, it's a living, breathing network of interdependence. Hunger has a way of returning quietly, tapping you on the shoulder just when you start to feel settled. Food on the frontier is never guaranteed, and you begin to notice how often conversations drift back to supplies, stores, and what might be left for tomorrow. A widely accepted historical fact is that many frontier communities experienced frequent food shortages due to bad weather, poor harvests, or disrupted supply routes. You glance at a modest pantry and realize that abundance here is measured in days, not weeks. A lesser-known detail is that many families kept meticulous mental inventories of their food, knowing exactly how long flour, beans, or dried meat might last. Written records were rare, but memory was sharp when survival depended on it. You watch someone carefully portion out ingredients, their movements deliberate and calm, and you realize that this quiet arithmetic governs daily life. Historians still wonder how often hunger was present but unrecorded, softened in journals or recollections that preferred optimism over truth. Cooking smells fill the air, beans simmering slowly, bread baking unevenly, meat sizzling when it's available. The aroma is comforting, but it carries an edge of tension. You eat mindfully, aware that wasting food isn't just impolite, it's dangerous. A light joke slips into your thoughts. Congratulations. Leftovers here aren't a lifestyle choice. They're a survival strategy. You chew slowly, savoring each bite, noticing textures and warmth in a way that feels almost ceremonial. Hunting and foraging become regular topics of discussion. Someone mentions tracking game at dawn. Another recalls a failed attempt when animals simply didn't appear. You realize that food acquisition here requires patience, skill, and a tolerance for disappointment. A missed hunt doesn't just affect dinner, it reshapes plans, labor, and morale. The uncertainty sits quietly at the table with you, unspoken but present. As evening deepens, you notice how meals serve as checkpoints, moments to assess resources, share information, and reinforce bonds. Food becomes communication. You see glances exchanged, subtle nods, and the quiet relief when everyone eats enough. The lantern light flickers gently, casting shadows that dance across walls, and you feel a growing respect for the resilience embedded in these routines. By the time dishes are cleared, hunger has receded, but awareness remains. You understand now that food on the frontier isn't just nourishment, it's planning, cooperation, and trust rolled into each meal. You lean back, listening to the soft crackle of a fire, and reflect that survival here depends not on constant abundance, but on adaptability and patience. And as night settles fully, your body begins to relax even as your mind stays gently alert, aware that tomorrow's meals are never fully certain. The night air cools quickly and you feel it settle into your bones with a familiarity that suggests this isn't your first long day. Just another one in a place where bodies age faster than calendars admit. You notice the way people move more carefully after sunset, stretching stiff backs, rubbing tired hands, easing into benches as if negotiating with gravity itself. A widely accepted historical fact is that life expectancy in the Wild West was significantly lower than today, not always because of violence, but because of disease, injury, and relentless physical labor. You suddenly feel very aware of your joints, which, until now, have enjoyed a suspiciously easy life. A lesser-known detail is that many people were considered old by their 40s, not because of a number, but because of wear. Sun exposure, poor nutrition, untreated injuries, and constant work etched time into faces and posture. You watch an older man, perhaps only 50, move slowly but deliberately, his knowledge clearly valued even as his strength has faded. Historians still debate whether people felt old sooner or simply accepted aging as part of survival, without the modern obsession over longevity. You suspect acceptance played a large role, mostly because there wasn't much alternative. You sit quietly, listening to creaks and sighs that blend with the night sounds. Crickets, distant livestock, the low murmur of voices winding down. A soft joke passes through your mind. Congratulations, you've discovered a world where anti-aging means sitting down when possible. There's a gentleness in how people accommodate one another's limits, offering help without comment, understanding without explanation. Lantern light flickers across faces marked by sun and wind, and you notice how age brings a certain authority here. Elders are listened to not for nostalgia but for survival knowledge, where water holds after drought, how storms behave, which routes are safest. Their memories are maps, their stories warnings disguised as anecdotes. You find yourself leaning in, absorbing details you didn't know you needed. As the night deepens, fatigue wraps around you like a blanket. You feel the day's labor settle into muscles, heavy but oddly satisfying. Old age here isn't feared as much as it's respected. Reaching it means you've endured. You lie back, staring at the dark sky, and realize that survival in the Wild West isn't about staying young forever. It's about lasting long enough to matter, to teach, to be part of the quiet continuity of people who adapt, endure, and eventually rest.
Night has fully settled now, and the town exhales as if it's been holding its breath all day. Lanterns dim one by one, conversations soften, and the wooden buildings creak gently as they cool, sounding almost relieved. You find yourself standing still, listening to it all, realizing that this is the moment where a decision quietly forms. A widely accepted historical fact is that many people who came west didn't stay. Some returned east, others moved on again, chasing opportunity or simply relief. The frontier was never meant to be permanent for everyone. A lesser-known detail is that letters home often softened the truth. Hardships were edited, loneliness minimized, and exhaustion wrapped in optimism. You imagine yourself writing one of those letters, carefully choosing words, debating how honest to be. Historians still wonder how many settlers truly believed they would stay forever, and how many were simply waiting for the right moment to leave without admitting it out loud. You sit on the edge of a wooden step, boots dusty, body tired in a way that feels earned rather than dramatic. The sky above you is enormous, scattered with stars unbothered by human plans. A quiet joke drifts through your thoughts. Congratulations, you've survived a full day, and the universe remains deeply unimpressed. Still, there's comfort in knowing you met the day on its terms. You think back through the rhythm of it all, the questionable breakfast, the careful water, the stubborn horse, the endless labor, the quiet rules, the food counted and shared. None of it was flashy, none of it felt heroic, and yet, it all mattered. Staying here would mean accepting that this pace, this uncertainty, and this physical honesty would be your normal. Leaving would mean returning to softer edges and quieter risks. The wind moves gently through the street, carrying the scent of dust, smoke, and cooling earth. You notice how the town doesn't ask you to decide quickly. The Wild West is patient like that. It simply continues, indifferent to whether you remain part of it or not. As you lie back and look at the stars, your eyelids grow heavy. Whether you stay or go feels less urgent now. What matters is that you understand something you didn't before. Survival here isn't about bravery or legends. It's about adaptation, endurance, and knowing when to rest. And as sleep begins to settle in, the town fades softly around you, content to exist whether you're watching or not. The night grows quieter now, and your breathing naturally slows, matching the steady rhythm of the world you've just wandered through. The dust settles, the wind softens, muscles release their grip on the day, and thoughts drift like clouds moving without effort across a wide, dark sky. You don't need to decide anything anymore. There's nothing to solve, nowhere to go, and no expectations waiting for you. Just the gentle awareness that you're safe, resting, and allowed to let go. Imagine the stars overhead fading slightly, not disappearing, just dimming enough to feel distant and calm. Each breath becomes deeper, smoother, in and out, like the slow rise and fall of the land itself. The Wild West, with all its weight and demands, eases into the background, becoming a quiet memory rather than a task. Your body sinks comfortably, supported, warm, and still. The night holds you without asking anything in return. Sleep comes easily now. End of script. Sweet dreams.